Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. And it's my turn to thank you, all of you, to be part of this first workshop for this non-ghost project. So I think we are all excited, as Ulrich said, to be part of this new project. It will lead to a stronger collaboration. As Radim said, we are already collaborating for quite a while, but it will be a great opportunity to have much more work in common. And also, this workshop, I want to say it again, is just the first one of a long series of workshops on school that will happen in the next 3 years. So as you understood so far, this project is pretty broadband in terms of physical effects we want to study, in terms of quantities we want to look at, in terms of physical platforms we would like to study. And this is why, in this context, for this first workshop, I chose a quite general title for my talk, like distributing entanglement in quantum networks. We are all basically doing that. But it's a way for me to cover actually most of our activities in Paris in my group at Laboratoire Castres-Bruxelles. So some of them are really non-Gaussian in terms of photonics. This is a test bed we have been using also with Radim to show some the capability witness criterion that Radim was explaining, and I will come back to that. So it's really a test bed for non-Gaussian state and non-Gaussian quantum state engineering. But we are also developing other platforms like memories based on cold atoms, or cold atoms coupled to nanoscale waveguides, which are emerging platforms. And we would like really to study also this kind of platform in the context of this project. So I will try today to address more or less all of this platform and show you where we are and what we are doing in these directions. So you all know this picture of Jeff Kimball about the quantum internet, how to make a kind of quantum networks based on quantum nodes and quantum channels. So to store and process quantum information, quantum channels where you want to distribute some quantum state of light. And we are tackling many of this part of the network. So we have a few labs working in this direction. So the first one is a hybrid photonics lab, where we are doing quantum state engineering, but taking a specific approach, which is to combine today what we call the continuous variable approach and the discrete variable approach, aiming at developing a kind of heterogeneous networks where you can combine these two approaches. The second activity is to develop free space quantum memory, very efficient quantum memory that we can achieve now. And the goal is to build little by little, piece by piece, a quantum repeater which require a quantum memory for synchronization. And the last activity, which now involves two experimental labs, is to couple cold atoms and nanoscale waveguides. So these waveguides, they can be nanofiber. This is the one we started with, and I will show you results about that. But we are also starting a new lab where the nanofiber is replaced by a photonic crystal waveguide, a slow mode waveguide, where the interaction can be much stronger and still in a single pass way. So I will try today to cover all these topics, mostly the first two. Hopefully, I will have time for the last one. So let me start with this quantum state engineering lab. So the goal is to make quantum state engineering, as I said, but we're trying to combine these two traditionally separated approaches of quantum information, what we call the discrete and the continuous variable approaches, so leading to this optical hybrid quantum information. So you know that this is related to the duality of light. You can see it as a wave or particle. So you can be even counting photons like 0 or 1 or polarization as a degree of freedom, but you can also rely on the amplitude and phase, and then you will be using some demodulation techniques and measuring quadrature of your electromagnetic field. So you can try to combine these tools and concepts to develop new kind of protocols. So, for instance, the picture we have in mind is in the future that you would like to develop this kind of platform, of network, where you have some nodes, which can be photonic platforms, which can be material platform. I think about optomechanics, about atomic ensembles. Some of them will be better suited for CV encoding, continuous variable encodings, and some other for discrete variable encodings. So how you may be able to connect them together. To be able to do that, the first resource you want to have is entanglement between these two kinds of encoding. So this is what you need, that we call hybrid entanglement of light. That was a cover of Nature Photonics a few years ago. We had a back-to-back paper with the group of Marco Bellini, and we demonstrated this optical resource, where you see here entanglement between discrete variable on one side. So it depends, it can be different kind of encoding, but it can be, for instance, for us, a 0 or 1, a photon or no photon, on the Schrödinger cat state, so continuous variable qubit on the other side. All this topic, so I will give you more details now about this topic, but it will be also covered by a poster today by Beate Hersenbeck, who will give you more details, and you can ask also much more questions about the ongoing experiments in the lab about that. So let's go to the lab. So this is how it looks like. It's a bit similar to what Ulrich was presented before. There is no much fiber. It's not a telecom wavelength here. But what I want to show you on this table is it's a mixing already of many tools. So you have OPOs. So this is what we are using to make a non-classical light. So we have actually more than that on the table. We have 3 OPOs, which are equivalent to 5 independent single-mode squeezers. We have homodynamic detection, which enables to detect make the full quantum state tomography of the light you are generating, but we also use them as a processing tool to tell you, for instance, the success of a protocol. And we are also using many single photon counters, which are based on the superconducting single photon detectors. So we are mixing here already many tools which belong usually to continuous variable approaches or discrete variable approaches. So let me zoom a bit on this setup. So again, we are using optical parametric oscillators, as you can see here. So it's either single mode squeezer or 2-mode squeezers. So it depends on the crystal you are using. So we are using either a KTP and PPKTP with different phase matching. And we put that in a triply resonant cavity. So that gives us OPOs which have very low threshold. So you can make, for instance, this kind of squeezing. So here you have a plot when you scan the phase of the local oscillator with 11 dB of squeezed light generated out of this optical parametric oscillator. We are working also, so we are working at 1064 nanometer, so near infrared for this experiment. And you know, usual single photon counter are not so efficient at 1064. So it was very important for us over the recent years to move to superconducting detectors. But it was not obvious a few years ago at this wavelength to find some. So we had a very nice and fruitful collaboration with GPL and NIST with the group of Seoul-Nam to develop superconducting nanowire detectors working at 1064. So it was an iterative process and to find the good combination of layer that you put on the top of your system, for instance, to increase the overall efficiency. But at the end of the day, what we get is a quantum efficiency, a system detection efficiency, so including the fiber up to the detectors, which is above 90% on a daily basis. And the noise is below the 1 count per second. You are working at a cryogenic temperature close to 1.5 K. So this is what we are using in this experiment. So we are using homodynamic detection, again, very efficient, above 99%, but also detectors for single photon, which are above 90% on all that in the near infrared. So all these experiments are based on heralding measurement. Right? We are using SPDC, so it's everything is probabilistic, but we can make it heralded. And the strategy we are using is a strategy where you make a measurement on correlated beams, and given this measurement, you get a state on the other side in a probabilistic but heralded way. And thanks to the OPOs we are using, you can already see it here because, I mean, when you get this kind of level of squeezing, it tells you something about the OPO you are using. It tells you that the escape efficiency is very high, and so the states you get can have a very high purity. So for instance, you can make very good single photon source. So here, if I use a two-mode squeezer, so an OPO with a type 2 phase match crystal, we generate squeeze twin beams here. And if you detect here with our superconducting detector a single photon, then on the other side, you conditionally prepare a single photon. But thanks to this nice OPO, the heralding efficiency now in this experiment is 93%. So that means so there are different ways to interpret this heralding efficiency. If you look the state, that means there is only 7% of vacuum in the density matrix. So then if you reconstruct the Wigner function, this is what you have here, you have a very negative Wigner function for your single photon. In other terms, also this heralding efficiency, so this is a P1 term, the single photon component in your state. It means, given a click on your detector, what is the probability to really have a single photon at the output of your system? It is here 93%. So we can do that up to 1 megahertz rate with 50 megahertz bandwidth. And also, as we are using cavities for these OPOs, we have a very good spatial mode. We are making interferences between these photons, and the visibility can be well above 99% when you make this kind of gates. So we have been using this experiment to make single photon, to make witnesses for single photon entanglement. And also very recently, and Radim presented this work, and it was actually published in Optica yesterday night. It was a very good timing. So we have this paper about the Fock state bunching capability. So trying to see if I give you many photons coming from our systems, which will have some discrepancies, and we try to mix them with beam splitters and so on, what is the highest Fock state we can build? And we were showing that given the state we have to start with, we can go up to 14, and it was actually limited by the computing power for the quantifier. So you can also push, of course, to the engineering of higher Fock state. So for instance, if you still start from these twin beams and now you get 2 clicks on your superconducting detectors, you will get a 2 photon Fock state, and you can see here the Wigner function, which has also strong negativity, and that can be generated at 200 Hertz rate. So that's what I will call the discrete part of our experiment, trying to generate a Fock state. But as I told you, what we would like to generate is really this state, this hybrid entanglement of light between DV and CV, and between, particle-like and wave-like system. So this kind of superposition between 0 and 1 on one side, photon and no photon, and coherent state or cat state on the other side. So how we do that? So what we do first, so you see the experiment, which was on the table I was showing you right before. So you start from a 2-mode squeezer, still our OPO, you can see here, but in a 2-mode squeezing way. So you get twin beams, Signal and Idler, which are orthogonally polarized. So I can separate them on a PBS. And when I get a click after filtering on the superconducting detectors, then either you get a click and you get a single photon, or nothing happens and you basically have vacuum on this part. So that will be the DV states in our experiment. So now I want to generate continuous variable state. So I can make another experiment where I start from another OPO, which is a single mode squeezer. So that means at the output, Signal and Idler are degenerate, and you get squeezing. This is the one used before, as I was showing you, to get this 11 dB of squeeze light, except here we are using it further from threshold on just a few dB of squeeze light. So then the way to make a cat state is well known for a long time, is to take a very small part of your squeezing, a few percent, and then when you get a click, you will generate a state which has a very large fidelity with a kitten state. So Schrödinger cat state, but with a moderate size with alpha around 1. So this is what you get. If when you get a click, you get a cat state, which here is a odd cat state. So you have an odd distribution of number of photons. And if you don't have a click, you get a squeezed state, which has also a very high fidelity with a small Schrödinger cat state, even cat state in that case. So we have two experiments in the lab. One which can generate by heralding some DV state, and the other one which can give you some plus and minus, so even or odd cat states. So how you make entanglement now between them? You run them at the same time. You mix the conditioning path in the middle in an indistinguishable way. And when you get a click in the middle, you don't know where the click is coming from. So either you generate this one photon on one side and squeezing on the other side, or you generate a vacuum on one side and the other cat state on the other side. And you have no way to know where the photon is coming from, and you end up with this superposition of this 0, 1 and cat plus, cat minus. So that was done in the group quite a long time ago again. It was more than 6 or 7 years ago we did that. It was a back-to-back paper again with the group of Marco Bellini, which was using another technique to generate a similar state. So what we have been doing over the recent years was to use this state now for some protocols. So for instance, you can use it to remotely prepare a continuous variable qubit, so Schrödinger cat state, at a distance. You don't want to propagate a cat state, which would be very sensitive to the loss. But thanks to this entanglement, you can generate in this way a qubit at a distance. So the point of this paper was to make here a detection on the DV part, but it was using an homodyne detection to make the conditioning. And then we are doing some homodyne conditioning. So you get a quadrature measurement, and then you decide to open or not the selection. And then you can prepare on the other side, you project into any CV qubit on the Bloch sphere. Of course, you can change the phase of the local oscillator, so this is why you can go wherever you want on the Bloch sphere. Another experiment we did more recently was to show that this hybrid entanglement can be used in a specific cryptographic scenario, which is a one-sided scenario. So we were able to verify that we can violate steering inequality using this hybrid entanglement. The last experiment, which was published last year, was the following. So the idea was we want to make an heterogeneous quantum network where we can have some kind of entanglement between discrete variables like DV-DV entanglement, like single photon entanglement. You can have hybrid entanglement, DV-CV entanglement. And we wanted to make a swapping experiment between these two different kinds of entanglement. So what we did here was to mix in the middle these DV modes here. So DV and DV part here in a middle station, make a Bell state measurement, and then generate entanglement between these two modes that never interacted in the past. So this Bell state measurement was a bit specific. We were using at the same time homodyne detection and single photon counting. So just to show you, I will not enter into the details. This is something you can also discuss during the poster session. But this experiment we're using typically 5 independent single mode squeezers because we need to generate the single photon entanglement. We need to generate the hybrid entanglement, and then you need to combine them, make an additional measurement, this Bell state measurement, to herald the success of your entanglement swapping. So this is what we did. We were using these OPOs on the SNSPD to generate single photon entanglement that you can see here. We were using them to generate hybrid entanglement here, and we needed then to combine the DV part, and to be able to do that, it was necessary to have a delay line to combine them at the good timing. And then we were doing the Bell state measurement here in the middle again, which is mixing single photon detection on a superconducting detector and homodyne conditioning here. When all that succeed, we can then have this hybrid entanglement here at the end between these two modes that never interacted. So just to show you the result, so this is a full quantum state tomography of the output beams here when we make the Bell state measurement, and you see appearing some coherence terms that show you entanglement. If you don't do the Bell state measurement in the middle, just to confirm that in that case you have no entanglement. So it was a demonstration of hybrid entanglement swapping based on these resources. One goal now, and this is something we are doing now also in the lab, is to use also this kind of resources to make encoding conversion between CV and DV qubit. But I will not report about that today. So that was the first part of my talk about quantum state engineering. So again, we are pushing protocols using hybrid entanglement, but at the same time, in the context of all our work with Radim, it's also a nice test bed for making some tests of witness for non-Gaussianity. So it can be like the capability paper I was explaining before, Radim explained in his talk, is bunching capability. Something we did also in the past was to make bigger Schrödinger cat states by using also some squeezed Schrödinger cat, for instance. So we were able to make big cat states which are squeezed because what matters is actually the non-Gaussianity you have, and then everything rely on the Gaussian operation you need to add if you want to come back to the non-squeezed cat state. And we were also showing with Radim on this experiment that a squeezed cat state, you can propagate further. It's more robust to loss also. And that was a paper we did also 2 years ago. So let me go now to the other platforms, which are not so easily related actually to non-Gaussian states, but actually there are. And there are many experiments we are thinking of now where we can investigate this non-Gaussian aspect. So the first experiment I will show you now with cold atoms is how to make an efficient quantum memory for light. So we have been working on this. So you see here a vacuum chamber, you see beam. So what you see in the middle is a bubble of millions of cesium atoms at very low temperature. And we have been doing for a while now quantum memory experiment with this system. So for instance, trying to store some superposition of Laguerre-Gaussian modes. So that was this paper, which was a quantum memory for qubits, which were not encoded in usual degree of freedom, but in spatial degree of freedom here. We were also pushing this multiple degree of freedom using this vortex beam of light, where you have in the transverse plane a distribution of phase, but also a distribution in polarization. And we were able in this system to store both degrees of freedom at the same time and retrieve. But at that time, so that time means 6 years ago, 7 years ago, basically the efficiency was still limited. So what is the efficiency? Is the probability that if I store a photon to get it out of the system, and you want that close to unity. At that time, that was the state of the art, the efficiency was typically in this kind of memory around 20-25%, because the number of atoms we were using was not large enough. So what I want to show you now is how we can actually now reach a very large, close to unity, close to 90% storage and retrieval efficiency in this kind of setup. So I don't need, I guess, in this audience to explain that we want to make long-distance quantum communication, and there are two ways to do it. So either you use a quantum satellite, and we have seen many papers, and that will be likely used in combination with a second way to do it, which is quantum repeaters. And if you want to make a quantum repeater, so long-distance distribution of entanglement, you need quantum memories for the scalability of this development. So this is our classical network. It works. It works because you amplify the light with erbium doped amplifier, which you all know that we cannot use in quantum communications. The no cloning theorem will forbid that. So we need to find other tools, and the other tools is a quantum repeater. I just go fast and flash this slide. You all know this topic. But the idea is just you have a very long distance, and then you cut it in many segments. Then you make entanglement between these segments. And if you do a Bell state measurement in the middle, you can extend pair by pair this entanglement and end up with a long distance where you have entanglement. And by teleportation, for instance, you can transfer a qubit from one end node to the other end node at a long distance. Long distance meaning hundreds of kilometers. This is the target to be at the continental scale. If you just do that, it doesn't work. If you just do that, it doesn't work because the number of segments is large. Most of the protocols are probabilistic. So what you need to do, if you don't want to increase the communication time in an exponential way, you need to store the entanglement into quantum memories. So like that, you have a synchronization tool, which is the goal of a quantum memory, not only for network. If you do linear optical computing, you would like to synchronize your resources, to synchronize your single photons to increase the rate. This is exactly the goal of a quantum memory in a network, is to synchronize the network. You need to wait for this segment to be ready. When it is ready, then you can keep this entanglement and prepare the other one. And when everyone is ready, you can build the tree, build your network. And this is what gives you the better scaling for the communication time. So the name of the game is really how to build these efficient quantum memories. So the goal is to do something like that. This is our paradigmatic picture of the Quantum Internet Alliance project. I will come back to it, which is one of the flagship in Europe. So the general strategy to make a quantum memory is that you start from a qubit. You want to write it in a matter system with two energy levels, and then you want to read it. And again, you want to do that preserving the coherences. You want to be able to store a qubit, and you want to do it in an efficient way. So there are different approaches to do that. The first one is to use a single atom, for instance. But you need to put that in a high finesse cavity. So I show you one protocol where you have a three-level system, but a single atom inside the cavity. And you have here example. This is a picture from the group of Jeff Kimball, but you have many other realizations now in a variety of platforms. The other way to do, and this is the one I will focus now on, is the use of an atomic ensemble. So you have many atoms to be used, and of course, interacting a single photon, a single qubit with many atoms is much easier to do. You have a much larger probability to interact and to absorb the photon. But importantly, what you are going to generate in this way is a collective state. So that means if I take the example of all the atoms prepared in one state, the green one here, when I'm going to absorb a single photon, I will do it in a way that I don't know which of the atom will be excited. So you get this giant superposition of n terms, where n is the number of atoms. And when you are going to read it out, you will have an enhancement effect, which makes that the photon will be not re-emitted randomly in space, but you will know exactly where to catch the photon. So that means I can come with a single mode fiber, send it into my memory, and then when I'm going to read it out, I can put another single mode fiber, and I will get the single photon inside this single mode fiber. So this is due to this collective excitation. And also the nice point of this collective excitation is that you have many atoms in your system, and of course it opens the capability of doing some multiplexing, which is an important step for quantum repeaters. So many ways to use atomic ensembles. It's not just atomic ensemble, it's not just cold atoms, it can be ions, it can be warm vapors, and of course it can be also doped crystals, as you can see here. So in our case, we are using cold atoms. In all these protocols, the name of the game, if you want a large efficiency, again, probability to get a photon in and out, is the number of atoms. So more precisely, is what we call the optical depth of the ensemble. So what is the absorption at resonance of your system? So its output is equal to the input exponential minus OD, and OD is what we call this optical depth. So you need a lot of atoms, of course, if you want this number to be large. Then the scaling can be different depending on the protocol you will be using. But in any case, if you want to increase the storage and retrieval efficiency, you need to increase this number. So we understood that, of course, a long time ago, but it's a challenge in the lab to make a very large magneto-optical trap with a very large optical thickness. So we built a new experiment over the recent years, which were an elongated quasi-2D mode. You can see here in a glass chamber. You can see here the two pair of coils with quite a lot of trapping power, a few hundreds of milliwatts, very big beams here. You can see the collimation packages you have on three sides of the vacuum chamber that you can see here also in the middle. Some stage of compression, also some PG cooling to get cold atoms at the end. And we end up with this kind of pictures. So this is really a picture you can see here of the chamber, the magnetic coils around. And here you see a 3 centimeter long magneto-optical trap. And in this one, so that was a few years ago, the optical depth was around something like 300. So then we are using as a protocol EIT for storing our qubits. So just a reminder, for EIT, you start from a 3-level system. So you have 2 ground states and 1 excited state. You prepare all your atoms in one of the ground states, and you will send on this transition the qubit you want to store. But you are helped with a control field here on the other transition. So if you just go through what you are going to do, again, this photon is supposed to be absorbed strongly because the optical depth is 300. So you should have exponential minus 300 of absorption at resonance. But if you send also this control pulse, then you open a transmission window, which is going to lead to slow light. This is the principle of slow light. But now, if the pulse is completely squeezed inside the atomic ensemble, if you also switch off the control field, you are going to transfer your photonic excitation to an atomic excitation, what we call a dark state polariton or a spin wave. And later on demand, if you switch on again your control field, you are going to release your photon. So the question is, if I send a photon here, what is the probability that I get a photon at the output after all this process? So with this new system, we did it with a polarization qubit in this memory. So this is as a function of time, the number of counts you get on your single photon detectors. So the blue line, for instance, is what you get without atoms. So this is our reference. If you just do slow light, you see I can delay the pulse. This is what you see here. But now, if when the pulse is delayed, I switch off the control field and switch on again after a few microseconds, then you see the photons going out. So then you can quantify the memory efficiency. All that is done at the single photon level as a function of the optical depth. And as you can see, as expected, then the efficiency is increasing. The red points are the experimental data. The other line are our theoretical model with or without optical pumping in a single Zeeman level, which we didn't do actually. So this is why we are following the blue line. And we were reaching a plateau with a value around 60 to 70%. So that was pretty good result. We were pretty happy. The qubit fidelity was 99%. So that means we have a very good rejection of the noise. And the storage and retrieval efficiency for this qubit was something like 70%. So the question at that time was why this is only 70% and not 90%. Actually, if you increase further the optical depth, it will decrease. So that was really the maximum value we can achieve in the experiment. So we came back to some calculation, and that was done in particular by Alexandra Cheremet, who was a Marie Curie fellow at that time in the group. And we did actually many calculations about this kind of stories in the past when we were working 10 years ago with warm vapor, where you have to take into account the fact that in cesium, or in alkaline atoms, on the D2 line, you have many excited levels that you do have to take into account. So if you take them into account and you write the decoherence rate in the ground state, what you find is some additional terms which depend on the separation between the excited states. So, of course, with warm vapor, you can think it's very important. You have very large Doppler broadening. So this is why we were studying that 10 years ago in this kind of system. But actually, it's also very important with cold atoms. And you have actually an off-resonant excitation by the control field of all the other excited levels. So you add many additional terms in your decoherence. And this decoherence is not a big issue if you work with a low OD, but if you increase a lot the OD, this decoherence will translate into loss. So this is a transmission window of the sample. So you can see it absorbs the light, but you can open a transmission window in the middle by EIT. But when you increase the OD, you see that the transmission window is actually suppressed and you lose a lot of light due to this decoherence steps. So we understood that at that time. It sounds maybe obvious now, but just cesium D2 line is not the good line to make a quantum memory. So what you need to do is, so this is a prediction, as I was telling you, if you do that, you go up and then you go down due to this compromise between better efficiency and the loss due to this decoherence steps. And we were here in this experiment. So there was no way, if we are still using cesium D2 line, to go further. So we changed all our lasers, we understood that, and we went to D1 line. D1 line is much better because if you go in the excited state, there is only two levels which are separated by more than 1 gigahertz. So we built a new setup, and we were expecting that if we get 400, 500 of OD on the D1 line, you see, we should be able to be at 90% efficiency. So we did it, and actually it worked, and that was a recent paper. So if you plot here, so you have, I give you here the G2, the W parameter, the G2, so the suppression of the multiphoton component. 1 is for a coherent state, 0 for a perfect single photon. And we were generating by another way a single photon. So P1 is actually the excitation probability of a DLCC setup. I will come back to that. But what I want to show you here is that we store a single photon with basically 90% storage and retrieval efficiency. And if you measure the G2 before and after the memory, basically you keep the same value, so there is no added noise by the process. And this is the efficiency scaling. As you see, we can reach this plateau, and already for an OD from 300, 400, we are close to 85 to 90% storage and retrieval efficiency, and again, for a true single photon. So what we wanted to do then in the context of a quantum network is to make memories for entanglement. So what we did, so that was done in the past with different setups, either DV or CV, also different platforms like cold atoms or crystals, but the entanglement transfer. So if you measure what was the entanglement you start with and how much you end up at the end, if you measure it with some monotone measurement like the concurrence of entanglement, basically the transfer was 25%. But it's a very important number, actually. If you come back to some paper like this one by Nicolas Angoire and co-workers, which is a very important paper in terms of quantum repeater architectures, what you see is, so we give here the distribution time it takes for something like 600 kilometers for many different architectures. I don't care today. So all these letters are DLCZ, SPS, whatever. It's different kind of architectures as a function of the memory efficiency you can achieve in your setup. And what you can see is typically, if you go from 60 to 90% efficiency, again, whatever the architectures, what you win is 2 orders of magnitude in the distribution time in your network. So any small increase you get in the memory efficiency has a huge impact on the efficiency you can get in a quantum repeater. So we were showing that in this paper. So we were working with single photon entanglement, which was generating by another atomic ensemble, storing the entanglement in 2 quantum memories, and measuring them the entanglement after storage. And we calculated the entanglement transfer. So we are measuring the input and output concurrence, so, which is a monotone measurement of entanglement. And we get a 85 entanglement transfer, which is in good agreement with this efficiency we were achieving. So just to show the experiment, as I said, we were using the DLCZ protocol in a cold atomic ensemble to generate the first single photon. So here the OD was much smaller, it was an OD of 6, and G2 was below 0.1. When we got this single photon, then we split it on the beam splitter, and we get a single photon entanglement that we store in 2 spin waves, which were actually in the same atomic ensemble, but they were independent. So 2 spin waves, which were entangled. And then you can retrieve entanglement and characterize it by doing fringes and by doing photon counting and measure the entanglement you get at the end of the day. So all this work was done in the context of QIA, the Quantum Internet Alliance, and you see here Félix Hoffé and Mintao Shao, who did all this work already 1 year, 2 years ago. So QIA, so this is a Quantum Internet Alliance, which is coordinated by Stephanie Wenner in Delft. And in particular, we have one work package where we are working on developing quantum repeaters, and in particular the hardware for doing that, namely quantum memories, with many challenges in terms of efficiency. So I told you, we can now push it up to 90% in our system. Lifetime, I didn't tell you, but in our setup, it's typically limited to 15 to 20 microsec. So we need to go to a cooler atom or other trapping techniques for extending the lifetime. It has been done with cold atoms. And also an important point is a multiplexing capability, which is very important in our classical telecommunication system. But it will be also very important if you want to increase the rate of a quantum network. So there are different degrees of freedom. The one we are pursuing in my group is to use spatial mode multiplexing. So of course, we were doing it already years ago by storing a few modes, but now we are trying to push it to much more modes using spatial division multiplexing, which can be used in this kind of large OD for all of them at the same time. So this is what we are working on now. So let me go now in the next 10 minutes, something like that, a bit more, to the last system we are developing, the next interface, which is to couple cold atoms, you can see here, close to a nanoscale waveguide. And there will be 2 experiments. I will not show you the last one, but we are developing a new one, and that will be the conclusion of the part. So why we want to do that? So this goal of making a single atom to interact with a single photon, of course, it's a hard topic. And I want just to give you an overview of the techniques to do that. Of course, you can do that in free space, but the probability of interaction is small. It's limited by the cross-section of absorption, which is typically lambda squared, and the area of your beam, which is also diffraction limited. So basically, if you want to increase this interaction, you will go to very strong focusing, but the interaction probability will be limited from 10 to 20%. You can go to 4 pi microscopy, for instance, and go to a bit larger number. Another way to do it, we all know, is cavity QED. You make many round trips, so you will win by the finesse of the cavity. But another way that has emerged over the recent years is waveguide QED. So here the goal now is to go to the nanoscale, to put an atom close to the waveguide. And then if you define the decay of the atom inside the waveguide and in free space, outside of the waveguide, you can define this Purcell factor, which is proportional to 2 terms. It's proportional to these geometrical terms here, but you find it back in cavity QED or in free space, but here you are at the nanoscale. And there is a second term, which is the group index here. So that means if you propagate the light slowly, so it's still not a cavity, it's a slow mode waveguide, you can also increase the interaction. So now if you realize that, then you can calculate what will be the reflection of a single photon by a single atom. Or also, if you put many atoms, you can have a large OD, which will be proportional to the number of atoms times the Purcell factor. So something we would like to do in the future, it's kind of the graal of the field, is to have a very large Purcell factor in this configuration. All that in a single pass. Again, there is no cavity mode. You want to be coupled to continuum of guided mode, like in a fiber. But one atom can reflect the light. And also, as diffraction is not limiting anymore, you can have many atoms and use all the collective effects, like the quantum memory or the generation of collective excitation I was presenting just before. So let's go to the lab. So we have a first experiment in this direction, which is a nanofiber experiment. So this is a lab with nice light painting that Neil Corso did a few years ago. He was a postdoc at that time, and he's now a professor in Querétaro in Mexico. So if you zoom into the chamber here, there is a vacuum chamber, and inside its vacuum chamber, there is a nanofiber. So this is what you see here, some scattering here, but you have a nanofiber, which has a diameter below a wavelength, typically 400 nanometers. So that means half of the energy is circulating outside of the fiber. But still, if you go from the beginning of the fiber, which go into the vacuum and go out of the vacuum, the probability, the transmission is overall 99% or above 99%. So you don't lose light, but you can put atom in the middle and you can trap them in the evanescent field. So the way to trap them is to use a two-color evanescent dipole trap. So you contra-propagate light and you make an optical lattice in which you are going to trap your atom. The trap is really microscopic, so you have at most one atom per side. You are in this blockade regime. And also, you want to use some blue detune light to compensate some surface interaction. So overall, what you get is really the picture I'm giving here. You get something like a few thousand of atoms, typically at 200 nanometers from the surface. So the coupling is pretty weak in that case. If you calculate the beta factor, it's typically from 10 to minus 2 to 10 to minus 1 in the best case. And this is why we're also developing another platform, I told you, where we will be using the group velocity as another ingredient. But let's focus now on the nanofiber. So one of the first experiments we did with the nanofiber was to make memory. So we did some EIT again. So this time, the atoms were not trapped. We were just overlapping the nanofiber with a cloud of cesium atoms. The signal was at the single photon level and was propagating inside the fiber. So it was all fibered, input-output, and the control field was outside. So of course, we were able to observe some slow light, some reduction in the group velocity, but we were also able at that time to make a memory. So this is what you see here in terms of counts. This is a pulse without atoms. And now if you switch off the control field and switch on later, you get some retrieval. And the efficiency is not as good as in the free space. The OD was limited, it was a few units at that time, but we get 10% efficiency, all fibered at the single photon level. Then we learned how to trap the atoms. And in particular, if you make this dipole trap, you can change the wavelength of the trap, and you can change the distance between the atoms. So what we did was to make a trap very close to resonance. So typically, the distance between the atoms is lambda over 2 plus a very small mistake, because you still want to trap the atoms. And each atom will behave as a small mirror with a small reflectivity. So what you should get, if you send light now, is a Bragg mirror. And this is indeed what we observe. So I give you the reflectance in blue and the transmission in blue as a function of the probe detuning. And you can see that we were able to achieve something close to 70% with only 2,000 atoms, thanks to this tunable distance between the atoms. And there are many other nice effects to observe in this system. For instance, you can have some chirality, so that means you can have an asymmetric decay inside the waveguide. It depends on the polarization of the probe. So just by rotating by 90 degrees, the polarization of the probe that you are sending into your device, into your nanofiber, you will be either in the case of a symmetric decay in the waveguide or an asymmetric, strongly asymmetric decay in the waveguide. And then you can see that there is a change then in the reflectance you are measuring. So this is something we did a few years ago, and we are coming back also to this system to see how we can control this kind of Bragg mirror using a 3-level system now. The last result I want to show you on this nanofiber experiment is a paper we published 2 years ago, which was to create in this waveguide system a collective excitation, so a non-classical state, then you can read out as a single photon, and all that in a fiber configuration. So the process we used is a DLCZ process, the Lukin-Sirac-Zoller, which is very well known and used in free space. This is a way we generated a single photon in the quantum memory experiment I was presenting before. But here we wanted to do that in this all fiber system. So we prepared all the atoms along the fiber in this dipole trap, preparing them all in one Weygand state. And then when you send a right pulse, you are going to scatter light, in particular, some of them into the guided mode. And if you detect a single photon in this field 1 mode, in the guided mode, then you are going to herald a single collective excitation. So you get this single collective excitation that you can store. And then later on demand again, you can send a read pulse, which is phase matched. And then you are going to read this collective excitation and to emit a single photon into also the guided mode in the direction opposite to the field. So if you want to characterize it, you can just forget what is in the middle, like in SPDC, look field 1 and field 2, and calculate what are the cross-intensity correlation between this field 1 and field 2, what we call G12. Exactly like in spontaneous parametric Down conversion, it depends how strongly you pump your system. So for the right beam, so this is what this plot is giving you. P1 is a probability to get a click in field 1. So you can change this excitation probability. And you can see here that for a low excitation probability, where you are deeply in the single excitation regime, then we can go to a G12 above 100. So there are some operational benchmarks which are known in DLCZ kind of experiment. If you want to violate a Bell inequality, for instance, the G12 needs to be above 7. And if you want to make a rudimentary segment of a quantum repeater, as it was done in free space, you need a G12 of 25. So already with this system, we were showing that we are largely above these operational benchmarks, which was difficult because here you need a lot of filtering. So this is why it took a lot of time to do this experiment, because the atoms are trapped in this dipole trap, which is always on. And this trap is always on with a few milliwatt of light. So you want at the same time in this system to have the atom trap with milliwatt of light running into the fiber, and at the same time make at the cesium wavelength a single photon quantum optics experiment. So at the end of the day, we had some filtering, some volume Bragg grating, some cavities, and we ended up with an overall transmission above 50%. So we were not losing so much light, and still with more than 150 dB, 160 dB of noise rejection. And of course, it was very important to get this result. So then you can have over characterization. What is the retrieval efficiency? If you have an excitation, what is the probability to get it out? And you can see here that basically the plateau is at 25%. If it's too weak, then you have noise. If it's too strong, you go to the multiple excitation regime. But the plateau is a single excitation regime. And you can check that it is indeed the single excitation regime by measuring the G2, the condition of G2. So the single photon that you can generate actually at the output of your system. And you see that we can go up to 0.1 or below for this single photon. So that was really the first demonstration of a collective entangled state in a waveguide QED platform, which is an important step because in many proposals, it's also an initialization stage that you would like to create this entangled state and then make some further protocol. And we are showing here that it was possible indeed in this nanofiber-based system. So as I said, we are pushing this platform further now because we still believe it's also a very nice platform to go to high efficiency and long-lived quantum memory. But also, there are many other features that we want to study. I told you, for instance, making this Bragg mirror on controlling the Bragg mirror with a control field, so going to a 3-level system, and eventually with the control field inside the guided mode, then you will be able to control it at a few photon level. There are also many theoretical studies about super radiance and subradiance effects or selective radiance in this kind of system that we want to study, and many collective effects also. And this is a kind of platform that we would like to study with RADIM, also to characterize the state we can generate from this ensemble of atoms. The last platform we are now developing is to add into the game the group index. So having some structuration of the waveguide. And that can be done with a photonic crystal slow mode waveguide. Again, it's not a cavity. It's a slow mode waveguide, something like this W1 waveguide, for instance, where you have a missing line of holes, and you can have a group index of a few tens. So you can increase in this way the interaction. So we are developing now, in the context of a French and European also collaboration, this new platform. So just to give you a kind of overview of this kind of light matter interface in the group. So we have learned to make very efficient quantum memories that we are pushing now in free space towards multiplexing and quantum repeater application. We are also controlling a few thousand of atoms in the vicinity of an optical nanofiber with all these effects of nonlinearities, chirality, cooperative effects that we can explore in these one-dimensional arrays of atoms. And pushing now to a new regime where we will have at the same time collective effects, but also single photon addressing, having a large Purcell factor, all that in a single pass configuration. Just to summarize what I told you today, to give you an overview of the group for this first non-Gauss workshop. So Photonics Lab, which is a kind of test bed, I would say, in our collaboration with RADIM about non-Gaussian state, and different cold atom-based platform that we would like also to include in all our studies for this twinning program. So I will stop here, and I will thank all my colleagues, postdoc and students, and also Dima Kupriyanov in St. Petersburg, with whom we are collaborating on all this 1D platform. So thank you very much.